It was a quiet afternoon in the small neighborhood, where the rustling of leaves in the wind and children's laughter filled the air. On the porch of a modest house, Mrs. Mildred, a 74-year-old woman, sat peacefully in her rocking chair. Known as Grandma Millie by the neighborhood kids, she was a beloved figure, always ready to help with a warm smile. With her knitting needles in hand, she watched the street as she did every day. Suddenly, the tranquility was broken by a sound of urgency. Hurried footsteps and desperate sobs echoing down the sidewalk. Mildred paused her knitting, lifting her gaze, and saw a scene that made her heart race. A little girl was running barefoot, her messy hair blowing in the wind, tears streaming down her face. It was Emily, just 9 years old, a neighbor who lived a few blocks away. Mildred immediately left her chair and went to meet the girl. Emily looked exhausted, but the panic in her eyes was more alarming than any sign of fatigue. When she finally reached the porch, she threw herself into Mildred's arms, clutching her with all the strength her small hands could muster. "What happened, my angel?" Mildred asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. Emily couldn't answer right away. She was sobbing so hard that her words came out broken and almost incomprehensible. Mildred held her close, trying to calm her. After a few moments, Emily whispered something into the elderly woman's ear. The words hit like a punch. Mildred's eyes widened, and she gently cupped the girl's face. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Emily only nodded, tears still streaming down her cheeks. Mildred took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. Without asking more questions, she took the girl's hand and led her inside. She knew there was no time to waste. Inside the house, Mildred sat Emily on the couch, wrapped her in a blanket, and fetched a glass of water to help calm her down. The little girl was trembling, her body still consumed by fear. Kneeling beside her, Mildred held her small hands and asked gently, "Sweetheart, what exactly happened? Can you tell me now?" Emily took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice still shaky and broken. She told Mildred about a man who had broken into her house that afternoon. He was yelling at her mother, Lauren, and seemed completely out of control. Emily explained that, during a moment when the man was distracted, she managed to escape through the back door but had to leave her mother behind. Mildred's eyes filled with tears as she listened to the girl's account. The pain and fear were tangible, but there was no time to get lost in despair. Grabbing the landline phone, Mildred quickly dialed the police. Her voice, though gentle, was firm as she explained the situation. "A little girl came to me. She's very scared and said her mother is in danger. Please send someone immediately." After hanging up, Mildred turned to Emily, who was watching her with wide, frightened eyes. The elderly woman tried to smile, her expression reassuring. "We've called for help, my love. They're on their way." "You were very brave." Emily nodded slowly, but still clutched the blanket tightly. Mildred knew the next few minutes would be crucial. The only thing she could do was stay by the girl's side, offering the safety and comfort she so desperately needed. Time seemed to stand still. In the cozy living room of Mildred's home, Emily held a trembling glass of water in her small hands, but could barely take a sip. Every sound from outside made her wide eyes dart to the door. Mildred, sitting beside her, tried to keep a calm demeanor, though her heart was racing. "You were very brave to run out of there, Emily," the elderly woman said softly, holding the girl's hand. "But I want you to tell me, how did you manage to escape?" Emily hesitated, her eyes welling up with tears that threatened to fall again. After a moment, she began to speak, her voice low and hesitant. "He was yelling at my mom. He seemed so angry. I was hiding behind the table, and when he turned his back, I ran out the back door." Mildred swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. What this child had endured was something no one should ever have to face, let alone someone so young. She wrapped Emily in a warm embrace, feeling the girl's fragile body trembling against her own. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. And now, the police will handle everything. Despite her comforting words, the wait was excruciating. Mildred did everything she could to distract Emily, telling her stories from her own childhood and offering freshly baked cookies from the kitchen. But Emily could barely focus. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door, as if expecting something terrible to burst through at any moment. Finally, the sound of sirens broke the silence. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, briefly illuminating the room. Emily jumped to her feet, clutching Mildred's arm tightly. "They're here!" she exclaimed, a mix of relief and fear in her voice. Mildred held her hand and led her to the door. Outside, police officers were stepping out of their cars and approaching quickly. Mildred went out to meet them, explaining the situation with the same firmness she had used on the phone. Her house is just a few blocks away. Her mother is still there with the man who broke in, she said, pointing in the direction. The officers nodded and headed straight to the location. Mildred returned inside, sitting beside Emily once again. Now, all they could do was wait. The flashing lights from the police cars continued to illuminate the street as Mildred and Emily sat silently, the sound of hurried footsteps echoing in the distance. Emily clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for news at any moment. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers returned to Mildred's house. He knocked on the door and entered with a calm but serious demeanor. Kneeling to meet Emily's eye level, he spoke softly. "Emily, your mom is safe. She's with other officers now, and she asked me to come here to talk to you. She said she loves you very much and is incredibly proud of you." The tension on Emily's face dissolved instantly, replaced by tears of relief. She ran to Mildred, hugging her tightly. Mildred, too, felt the weight of her worry lift from her shoulders. "Thank you for taking care of her," the officer said, addressing Mildred. "Your call was critical." Before leaving, he turned back to Emily. "You were incredibly brave today. Because of you, we were able to prevent something much worse." Emily gave a shy smile, still clinging to the elderly woman. As the officer stepped out, Mildred gently stroked Emily's hair, silently thanking fate that things had ended well. The police lights began to dim outside, but inside the house, a sense of safety was finally beginning to take hold. The evening wore on, but within Mildred's cozy home, relief was slowly replacing the tension that had gripped the air. Emily, still snuggled close to Mildred, seemed to finally be relaxing. Yet her swollen, tear-streaked eyes searched for reassurance. "My mom, she's going to be okay, right?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with worry. Mildred gave her a warm smile and held the little girl's hands. "Yes, sweetheart. She's safe now. You were incredibly brave. Your mom knows that and loves you more than anything." Before Emily could respond, a soft knock at the door caught their attention. Mildred stood and opened it to find a tall woman in a police uniform standing there. It was the same officer who had helped bring Lauren, Emily's mother, to safety. "Good evening, Mrs. Mildred. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I have some good news for Emily," the officer said with a kind smile. Emily ran to the door, looking up at the officer with hopeful eyes. "Is my mom okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. "Yes, sweetheart, she is. She asked me to bring you to her. We want you two to be together now that the danger has passed," the officer explained, kneeling to meet Emily's gaze. Emily let out a deep sigh, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her small shoulders. She turned to Mildred, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you for everything, Grandma Millie. You saved me today." Mildred, her own eyes glistening with quiet tears, wrapped Emily in a tight embrace. "No, sweetheart. You were the one who saved the day. Your courage brought the help your mom needed." The officer waited patiently as Emily said her goodbyes, clutching the teddy bear Mildred had lent her for comfort. As the little girl walked out the door, guided by the officer, Mildred stood on the porch, watching the police car's lights fade into the night. Later that evening, sitting in her rocking chair, Mildred reflected on the day's events. She thought of Emily's bravery and the unshakable strength of a mother protecting her child. Despite it all, she felt grateful to have been able to help in a moment that seemed so dire. In the days that followed, Emily and her mother, Lauren, visited Mildred to thank her. Lauren, her eyes filled with tears, expressed her eternal gratitude. "You were an angel to us, Mildred. I don't know what would have happened if it weren't for you." Mildred shook her head humbly, holding Lauren's hands. "I just did what my heart told me to. The true hero is your daughter." She was incredibly strong. That day forged a special bond between Mildred, Emily, and Lauren. What began as an ordinary day turned into a powerful reminder of the importance of courage and compassion. For Emily, Mildred was no longer just a neighbor. She was a hero who had brought light to the darkest moment of her life.